That actually happened this morning on MS Now when Joe Scarborough had on the Chicago mayor, Brandon Johnson, who's ridiculous, a ridiculous person whose approval rating, you have more toes than he has approval ratings.
Don't know that.
And numbers in his approval rating. And here, watch this. Look at this.
Would you also like to get federal funding to help put 5,000 more cops on the street in Chicago? Would that help drive down crime?
Well, look, policing by itself is not the full strategy.
No, I understand that. You've talked about the other things you want. Would 5,000 more police officers on the street in Chicago be helpful to go along with all of those social programs?
Here's the best way I can put it, Joe, is that in the 90s when I was in high school, we had 3,000 more police officers and we had 900 people being murdered every single year in Chicago. It's just not policing alone. Of course, we want more detectives.
I know it's not policing alone. But do you believe that the streets of Chicago would be safer if there were more uniformed police officers on the streets of Chicago?
I believe the city of Chicago and cities across America would be safer if we actually had, affordable housing. Look,
okay,
I'm not saying that
that's not the question I asked.
Can I say...
Not going to do it. Everybody wants in on that one. Go ahead, Moynihan.
Oh, my God. I want to say 4 words that I've never said in my life and I hope to never say again. Good for Joe Scarborough.
Good for Joe Scarborough. I knew it. Same.
But no, I mean, this is a yes or no question. Yes, I do. And then explain contextually why you think it's not going to be the entire solution. But yeah, I think it would be great if the federal government would give us money, because this is what mayors of big blue cities want, more and more money. They believe money can always solve the problem. It's where do you spend that money? What do you do with that money? And to say that in the 90s, during the crack epidemic, I mean, the same thing is true of New York. I mean, we had, 2,100 murders a year in the city in 1990, 91. And, effective policing now with technology, I mean, it's insane. The difference is so significant. And why not just say yes to that question? Well, the answer is because he doesn't like the police. And he does not...
Because his answer is no, and he just doesn't want to say it.
No, he does not think the police are a solution to anything. I suspect if you asked him a question on Democracy Now! Or an appropriately kind of left-wing thing, would you take, if I gave you $50 million to get rid of entirely your police force, he'd probably immediately say yes to that. It's to the point that Kmele was making is that this is a thing where the culture battles loom large because the solutions don't exist, right? Because you would have to deal with something like, what are we going to do about policing on the ground? What are we going to do about policy and policy-oriented things? To say affordable housing, number one, total, complete, and utter bullshit. Number two, okay, do it. What's the solution, buddy? Let's find it. Oh, you're going to have the state take over the city of Chicago and build affordable housing and become Caracas, Venezuela? Because you have a murder rate just like Caracas. Maybe you should have a housing policy just like it too. Get out of here and pretend in some way that this is the thing that you need to do.
Their problem in Chicago, by the way, is not being caused by a bunch of rabid homeless running around murdering everybody. That murder rate in Chicago, which is about 550 people last year, is from the south side of Chicago, where it's gang-ridden, and it's like the black gang and the Hispanic gang, and you can't cross the line, the one street, because then you'll get killed by this gang or that. I mean, I've been there. I've met the moms. I have seen what's happened to their sons and brothers and fathers. Then the next generation grows up fatherless, and they all have houses. They all have a roof over their head. They're actually getting shot on the front porch of their houses, but it's not about affordable housing, right? There is no law and order. There is none, because Brandon Johnson doesn't want to send police in there, even if they're free. I mean, Trump, frankly, saying, do you want me to send a bunch of National Guard troops in to help with this problem or other law enforcement? It's almost the same feeling I had when he wanted to create Gaziera or Mara Gaza, right? Where it's like, oh, this is going to be a really tough one. My God, be careful. That's a lot to take on. But certainly there should be the same response in both circumstances. Those who are in the midst of this turmoil should say, please, God, yes, I would like some help with law enforcement and order. But no, Brandon Johnson would rather see everyone shoot each other. He does not give a shit about the 3-year-old girl who got shot in her parents' car this summer by some gangbanger. He doesn't care. I think that may have happened in Washington, D.C., but trust me, I could find 10 cases where it happened in Chicago. So that's what's so annoying about their stupid land acknowledgments. I await the DNC's tough talk about what's actually happening in our cities. You know, Matt Welch?
Part of the issue with Democrats in general, and this will also applies to Gavin Newsom, who's out there trying to meme his way into the national political conversation, is that they don't have a lot of governing success examples to point to. And in fact, they have quite a staggering number of failures. Including these failures, this Brandon Johnson is probably the best example of this in the country, where you have sort of zombie 2020ism. He still can't just bring himself to talk about policing without going into affordable housing. And it's like we remember 2020. Everyone lost their minds. Some of us a lot less than some other ones, perhaps. But we shouldn't be talking like that anymore. But you still find that in places like Chicago, where last time I looked, of the 50 members on the Chicago City Council, there were 0 Republicans. There are, I think, 46 Democrats and then like 4 socialists. The place has been absolutely dominated by Democrats and the left for a really, really long time, and as such is arguably the worst governed big city in the country. Part of the reason why he answered the question that he did, besides the fact that he's awful, really, really awful. He's just like literally a cutout for the teachers union, which he used to work for, is that even, the free money to do a thing, he can't hint in that direction.
It's
because
crazy.
His overwhelming priority is to try to get not just the city, but the state, and if he could, the federal government, to bail out the gaping holes in the teachers union pensions.
That's right.
That's right. All of Chicago's politics at the moment is wrapped around there.
100%.
The Democratic governor won't do it. I will say this, though. I understand the argument against having the National Guard and certainly the military come into a city. I don't think the federal government should be doing that in places where it is not invited and where there is not a riot or a crisis on the ground.
No, the legal authority is very sketchy.
It's sketchy, and it's a bad precedent. And our federal government right now spends $7 trillion a year. And 25 years ago, we spent $1.8 trillion a year, partly because we decided that the federal government and national politics must solve every issue, every local issue. The framers of this genius governing structure, the greatest and longest surviving in the world in a constitutional republic, understood that the federal government shouldn't be in charge of fixing local government failure. That is what we're threatening to do right now, and it's a recipe for all kinds of conflict.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I mean, we have our 50-state experiment, and it's kind of what makes us great, where we have a federal government, and there are certain federal laws that we all have to abide by. There's, of course, the U.S. Constitution. But what drew the original founding colonies into this union was so we get to be ourselves still, right? Like, we're not going to have to abide by, like, some master king rules, right? Like, we can be different in Virginia than you guys are going to be up there in Connecticut. Cool? And then everybody said, yeah, cool. And the more Trump seizes control in state after state, whether it's the police power or cashless bail, all things, I'm a very, very pro law and order person. So I'm on board with more cops, less crime, no more cashless bail. That failed. But forcing it by a president on states that have either ruled against it specifically with legislation, or, against their will is a different story. Like, it kind of F's up the 50-state experiment that is really at the bedrock of our foundational principles, Kmele.
And I think it does contribute to the appearance that some of this is, in fact, performative. I mean, you've got D.C., which has had historically like lower crime in different periods, but had an explosion in crime during 2020. It hasn't quite gone back down to pre-2020 levels. So there is a reason for concern. But at the same time, there's a bit of a kind of strange dynamic when National Guardsmen are coming from states that may in fact have higher crime rates to patrol the streets of DC, and the deployments are only in the safest areas, the kind of tourist centers of DC, not in the neighborhoods that have actually had the highest levels of violence, which is probably for the best, because I don't necessarily want National Guardsmen deploying to Southeast and kind of shooting it out with young kids.
They're
or something
gonna get
like
hurt.
that. That would be a very, very bad look for 100,000 different reasons. But the question becomes, like, how do we get to actually sustainable transformation of these communities that meaningfully lowers violence? As you alluded to a moment ago, Megyn, like, part of the reason that it's odd to see people like Johnson talk about white supremacy as the actual danger in Chicago when Democrats have been in charge of every facet of Illinois politics for generations now. At least it seems that way. Those can't be the things that are to blame.
And the people who are dying on the South Side, it's black on black crime, it's Hispanic on Hispanic crime, or Hispanic on black, blah, blah. That area is not suffering from a white supremacy problem. It's gang violence that no one gives two shits about.
Well, and exactly. The gang violence is precisely it. And oftentimes it's block by block. It's neighborhood by neighborhood.
That's exactly right.
It is insane. And one has to actually have empathy for the people who happen to live in these neighborhoods, who are not a party to the crime, which is most of the people who live in these neighborhoods, who effectively live in war zones. So I think you're right to call into question kind of the morality and the judgment of the political leadership who are looking at the day-to-day suffering of their citizens, of the people who voted them into office.
They don't care.
And not doing anything to affect the
question to Brandon Johnson was like, would you take free police help? It wasn't like, do you want the military to move in? Should we send in the armed Marines? It was like, do you want free help on the law enforcement? No. Okay. I mean, like, I went there. I interviewed mom after mom after mom on the South Side of Chicago in tears. Because think about it. I mean, I have two young boys. I have a young girl. Like, they know that their children have zero shot. They don't feel like they have any chance of getting out. Every relative they've ever had is living there, by the way. So they don't really want to leave their moms and their dads who are getting elderly and their aunts and whatever. And they know that, like, they look at their little boy. I look at my little boys and I think, oh, you know what? They could be president one day. They look at their little boys and they're like, please, God, let them live to 18. Let them live to 18 years old. And they know there's an overwhelming likelihood they're either going to get shot or they're going to get imprisoned before their 21st birthday. And that there's a pipeline right into that gang system. And they look at the little girls and just have to pray they don't get caught in the crossfire. I mean, it's an incredibly effed up way of living. And Brandon Johnson doesn't seem to care at all. He's more interested in his progressive bona fides saying, oh no, like, I'm against cops. He's probably like Mom Donnie. I want more social workers. Like, the social worker's going to go onto the South Side of Chicago and put herself in between the drive-by guy and the porch and do an intervention so we can center blackness and have a more meaningful conversation, Moynihan.
Well, I mean, a couple of things about this. First of all, you say it's black on black crime in Chicago. Let's not forget Jussie Smollett, who he was a victim of a Chicago racist attack, and that's what informing me.
That too turned out to be black on black.
Correct. It was Nigerian on American crime. The thing that drives me crazy about this is you start this as a nice kind of bookend of it, is that Democrats talking about history. All right, let's talk about history a little bit. I mean, as Kmele pointed out, so many of these cities have, or Matt pointed out, have, city councils that are 100% Democratic mayors for long stretches. Well, New York City had a very similar thing. And when it had Republicans, it had Nelson Rockefeller and John Lindsay, who were essentially Democrats. And then they decided after David Dinkins to give a try to someone named Rudy Giuliani, obviously a very different Rudy Giuliani than what we see today. But that worked. Was it just that? No. To Brendan Johnson's point, was it just policing? No. But if you look at history, what does it tell you? That smart policing, and this is, by the way, one of the reasons beyond the Constitution that I object to the National Guard being, is that if you talk to cops, and I just was doing this, they are like, no, we have very specific things in intelligence, and we have people in the communities, and we do this stuff in a real knit. We just need more funding and more of us. And I would highly, highly, highly recommend to listeners and viewers the new book from Peter Moskos. Peter was a Baltimore City cop and is now a professor at John Jay College here in New York City. And it's basically an oral history called Back from the Brink about how New York, through policing, brought New York City back to a normal place, from a place that was like honestly like South American, Central American levels of violence. And as he says, it's not entirely policing, but there was a lot of it was. And if they want to look back in history, don't go so far back as say land acknowledgement. That does nothing for anyone. Go back to New York City in the 90s, talk to Peter Moskowitz and say, okay, we don't want to flood the zone with, 30,000 cops, but what can we do with more cops and smarter policing to get violence levels down in this?
Talk to Bill Bratton. Bill Bratton is alive and well, and we'll walk you through exactly how he did it as the police.
The star of Peter Moskowitz's book. Yeah.
No, he's amazing. I'm blessed to be able to call him and his wife Ricky my friends, but he's done it in a couple of cities, and it's the whole broken windows thing. It's very famous, but like Bill Bratton's written whole books where you can read exactly how he and his team cleaned up New York. They don't want to. They think it's the ACAB thing, right? All cops are bastards. And F the police, defund the police. They like to say now they're not for that anymore in the Democratic Party. They're totally for that. In Mamdani, a couple of years ago, he was saying that. Now he's like, oh, well, not exactly. Now he just wants the social workers on the domestic violence calls.
Well, months ago.
Sure. Like any woman getting the shit kicked out of her by her, twice her size husband. What she really wants is a social worker to ring the bell and have a chat with him about white supremacy and implicit bias. It's ridiculous. That's Mamdani's view. That's Brandon Johnson's view. And I want to say that these cities deserve what they get because they keep voting these morons into office. But it's hard to look at those moms in South Chicago and say that. It's hard to look at a mom who's getting abused in Queens and say that. They feel powerless. They don't even feel like their vote counts, and their lives are not spent even on election day, standing and waiting online. They're probably working 3 jobs just trying to keep food on the table. What will the effect of the sparring between President Trump and the Federal Reserve be? Can the Fed take the right action at the right time? Or are we going to be looking at a potential economic slowdown? And what does this mean for your savings? Consider diversifying with gold through Birch Gold Group. For decades, gold has been viewed as a safe haven in times of economic stagnation, global uncertainty, and high inflation. And Birch Gold makes it incredibly easy for you to diversify some of your savings into gold. If you have an IRA or an old 401k, you can convert that into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold, or just buy some gold to keep in your safe. First, get educated. Birch Gold will send you a free info kit on gold. Just text MK to the number 989898. Again, text MK to 989898 and consider diversifying a portion of your savings into gold. So if the Fed cannot stay ahead of the curve for the country, at least you can stay ahead for yourself. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.